Hey, my name is ShawNshawN. I do art on ShawNshawN.co and specials on eBay. Today we're going to review Blinded by the Light. So Blinded by the Light is a movie by Gurinder Chadha. It's the same director of Bend It Like Beckham, which is a really good film as well. The time is an hour and 57. Ideally I'd do an hour and a half, but I think this film kind of needs it to fully flesh out a lot of the characters. The actors are Vivek Kalra as Javed, is this kid, Pakistani kid growing up in the UK, second generation. Kalvinder Gier is his dad, who's the first immigrant who chooses to leave Pakistan to come to UK for a better life for his family. Aaron Pagur is Roops. Roops is his friend, his Punjabi friend he meets. I'm not sure if he's Punjabi Pakistani or Punjabi Indian, but same thing. He becomes friends with Javed. Dean Charles Chapman is Matt, the local kid who's Javed's friend early on, and then they kind of have a falling out. And Neil Williams is Eliza, who's this white girl that Javed kind of falls for and then starts dating him. So the story is 1987. They get really time period piece. He's coming of age, he's a young teenager going from junior high to high school in the UK. His dad's from Pakistan. He's kind of I think he's a janitor, or he's a factory worker, definitely at one of the car plants. I think it's GM. And, this is during the Thatcher years, and they decide to cut back their workforce. They're probably offshoring it to China or somewhere else, right? Where the trade war is now, but so they're offshoring the jobs. His dad loses his job, and so the family faces hard time. The mom has to work till 12 o'clock midnight doing this small sewing business, and the dad's going weekly to all the job market and trying to find a job, and it's just a hopeless case. And then he reels in Javed, and he's like, Javed, you got to get a job. And we're gonna go to send you to university, but you still have to go and work. And so Javed's kind of in this environment, this tense environment. Javed runs into this kid Roops, who's from he's also Pakistani, but he's from Punjabi, so that's north. And Punjabis have kind of the turban, and they believe in a different version of God than the Muslims, right? So it's a different religion, but the same country or a similar country, because Punjabi is also in India. So you don't know if he's from the Pakistani side or the Indian side. Probably more the Indian side, because the Pakistani side probably would have been forced to be Muslim. All the people that weren't Muslim were kicked out of Pakistan when they split between India and Pakistan. So this is kind of the background that the family comes from. He also has two sisters, and one of the sisters rebelling secretly. We find out later in the film. Javed runs to this kid, Roops, in the hall, and then he's like, oh, I'm having a bad day. And he's like, dude, you haven't listened to this. You got to, pop your cherry on Bruce Springstein. And he's like, what the hell is this kid talking about? He leaves in his backpack. About a week later, he's like having his bad time. His dad's, talking trash to him, and he's just like, screw this, and tries the music. And he throws out all his poems, right? And then he puts on the music, and then he's like, oh my God, this is me. This is my life, because Bruce Springsteen grows up in New Jersey. His dad was kind of in a factory, broken dreams, similar to Javed's dad, working in a factory, broken dreams. And so he identifies really strongly with Bruce Springsteen and the kind of his message of hope and, general message, versus it's not specific to America per se. Obviously, he came from Jersey and all that and represents Jersey, but it's more a lot of universal themes that he identifies with. And so then he starts to rebel. He actually starts to dress like Bruce Springsteen, puts all Bruce Springsteen collection on his wall. He gets tickets to a Bruce Springsteen concert because he's coming to town. So he really gets really involved with this. And him and his friend try to take over the school radio, and they say, hey man, we got to do a Bruce Springsteen channel. People are like, what? And so what they do is they don't want to let him, right? Because the school DJ is like, no, forget that. So they sneak in and they put on Bruce Springsteen, and then they lock the door. The guy's like, and then, of course they get in trouble. So this is a pretty funny gig that they try to convert the school to Bruce Springsteen. And then, they have some dancing and singing. If it wasn't for the fact that it's based on a real story of two kids that fall in love with Bruce Springsteen, that would be a little bit too much music. But it kind of adds to the fun. When you're youth, you're really into music a lot and dancing. And then while he's working at the shop, he finally gets a job with his friend Matt, and Matt's dad has a small clothing business. He spots Eliza, and Eliza was in his class, and he likes Eliza, and he starts singing to her, and then kind of ask her on a date, and then they go on a date, and then they start, dating, and then his parents don't want him to date at all. They want to do an arranged marriage because he's Muslim. So, and she's rebelling at the same time because she has these really Tory, very conservative parents, and they're just kind of very obnoxious in their political view, and they're just telling their daughter, oh, you're going to be like us one day, and she's like, screw that. And she's always, dating rebellious kids, like a reggae guy, and and now it's this Indian guy or this Pakistani guy. And her parents are like, see, you're just rebelling against us again, dating. And she's like, what's rebellious about this kid? And he's just like this typical nerd from Pakistan trying to just get good grades to go to university, right? Get us out of this factory life, that his dad has. And there's nothing conservative there. So it has a lot of fun elements to the film. There's also a scene where it turns out he finds out about his sister goes clubbing. And you're like, how do you go clubbing? He's like, oh no, there's these day clubs. And you're like, what? And so she sneaks out. She has a school uniform and everything. Goes to school, ditches school. They go to the club. And the changes, she has like this Madonna look. And then she's dancing to typical Pakistani kind of Indian style music, and they have like the live band, and they're really jamming. And then he's like, Bruce Springsteen's awesome. He's like, oh, but I like this too. So he's kind of realizing that he's, he still has his own music from Pakistan that's really cool, but he's also gelled with Bruce Springsteen. So it's a really good way to show that he's between both the cultures, right, musically. And so his sister's kind of falling into the traditional route more, but still rebellious, kind of going dancing, but within her own culture. And then he's in between, and he has a lot of white friends, so he's getting into Bruce Springsteen and other music, and he's writing lyrics for his friend Matt, who's down the road. And Matt's always trying to hook him up at a party with a girl, and he's like, I can't sneak out, even though he could just crawl out the window and jump down. I mean, he's not a very smart kid. I did that all the time as a teenager, just crawl out the window, jump down, skill up the balcony. It's like, dude, it's not that hard, man. So he's a really good kid in a way. So it's kind of funny. You see this really strict upbringing and really the impact of it, as well as they show kind of the underculture under Thatcher with this conservative government. It's like the third term already, going into the fourth term, and people are like, oh, they're done with Thatcher. It's too much. And you're getting kind of these neo-Nazi groups coming up, and you have this local guy. He finds one of this kid's poem when he throws away his music, and he's like, oh, this really impacted me, man. I worked, I was in the army, the RAF, and, I fought the Nazis in World War II. And then these guys, now I see kids dressing like Nazis, and he's like, oh my God. And he's like, oh, this poem is so awesome. And his dad's like, ooh, don't screw around with this, And his dad's resisting that he's a writer, and he doesn't think you can do anything with writing, because in Pakistan you wouldn't do anything with writing. So he has this locked mentality of Pakistan. You have to study science, math. That's the only route out. The only jobs are practically building, engineering projects, and that's all they would have in Pakistan. So he thinks the same. But this kid, he knows like, hey, I can go work at a newspaper, and he actually gets an article in a newspaper, and it's kind of the lead story against attack on a mosque. So he's really breaking out as a writer, and his dad's like, no, you shouldn't expose us. You should keep your head down. This is kind of true when you're a really extreme minority. When I lived myself not in Germany per se, because there was a lot of army vets, so it's kind of like, you're pretty neutral as far as coming outside of the continent, right? You're a little bit second class, but not too much second class. But when I lived in Poland, I was less than 1% of the population. So when I was there, dude, we definitely kept our head down. You were always fearful, like you don't want to stick out too much. You already stuck out like way out anyway. Like I had braces, no one in the country had braces. So it was like, I looked like a monster on the street. I was a lot healthier looking, people were kind of gray looking from growing up under communism. So yeah, you definitely want to keep your head down. So I really understood this dad's mentality of, if you're an extreme minority, you kind of have this, be careful, don't just do your job and, break in, you don't want to make too much of a nuisance because people are like already shocked you're there. But now the kids growing up a second generation, and the Pakistani immigration has grown quite a bit. So now they're a pretty big population. The country's kind of coming to terms with integration. And obviously the people that grew up poor white, they're rejecting against this because they're seeing some of the Pakistani come in. They're getting good factory jobs. They're slowly leaving the low class they started with, and these poor whites are stuck at the bottom. Like, how come these guys are getting ahead? So they're obviously protesting as neo-Nazis, which, all kind of extremist groups always come from the really poor roots. Maybe not in the case of Osama bin Laden, but whatever. But anyway, you get the point where usually a lot of these kind of extremist groups come from the bottom, that they're not doing well, so it's an economic stress. So the only way to get ahead is to protest against these people kind of leaving their backgrounds behind them. It was interesting because in this film, he's kind of coming from junior high to high school, and you have this transition. So in junior high, everyone's kind of being a nerd, and then in high school, everyone kind of breaks out and really shows their stuff, and they break into these subgroups. They have like the Cure group, which they call them something out there, but it's basically, they call them goth in here. So they're kind of the goths. We called them something else in high school, but it was the same type of group I recognized, where they'd wear all the dark clothes and listen to Cure and all this kind of weird dark music. And then you have like metalheads, and then you had some other people, like Matt's kind of in the metalhead or rock band, pop rock. And yeah, you have a couple different groups in school, and he doesn't really fit in anywhere, right? And I really identified this because, you know, my mom moved us all the way around, so we had no roots, completely, you know, pulled out of our environment and never bonded with any of our kids from childhood. And like, I went to 3 different high schools, so way worse than what this kid, not way worse than what this kid grows up, but if you go to 3 different high schools, you have to make friends 3 different times. You really don't bond with people. People are like, oh, this guy's, who knows who this guy came from. And so I kind of identified with that, as well as when I lived in Poland. Again, like I mentioned, I was 1% of the population or less, so that was a really extreme environment. And I was coming in as kind of the upper crust, bonding with other upper crust kids who had the opportunity to study abroad, which was very unusual at that time under communism. So, you know, I had this really weird experience there. I lived in Germany as well, learning German there. I lived in Spain. And Spain, it's a little bit rougher because if you have a short haircut like I have now, I didn't have that at the time. I had really long hair, so I definitely didn't look like a GI. But if you have short hair like this, man, you would be spotted out. They'd be like, go home, Yankee, and fuck you, and get the hell out. I mean, you would face this all the time in Madrid. So people always ask me, oh, you know, they didn't ask me if I was GI because I had long hair, so it's obviously I'm not GI. But yeah, there's kind of a little bit of animosity there, and they'd always like say, what's your position on Franco? Because basically the U.S. backed up Franco, right? So you go over there and you're kind of like the legacy of the U.S. backed up a fascist regime. And, you know, at the time, it was the choice between the fascists and the communists. So the U.S. didn't back either one. But the people didn't feel that way. They felt like, oh, you let us down. We could have had a democracy. And they did have a democracy, and it got overthrown by the fascists, right? But the U.S. government had a bigger fish to fry with the USSR taking over Eastern Europe and China helping out North Korea and China helping out in Vietnam. So they're way bigger fish to fry than kind of going against a fascist regime that was against the USSR. Like, oh, that's good enough. We'll figure it out later. But if you go there as an American, you're definitely going to have to deal with this legacy, right? And in Poland, it was weird because I came there, and this was during the Reagan years, going, you know, right into Bush 1. And this was right when communism broke down. So it really has this sense of, you're the kind of the hero. Everyone asked my opinion on the street, and I was like, dude, I don't know. I know Van Halen. I know some metal, and they're talking about Deep Purple. I'm like, who the hell's Deep Purple and the Beatles? And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't grow up with the Beatles. And, you know, I kind of know their music, but it wasn't popular at the time. That was from the 60s. And so it was really interesting, the disparity from Poland all the way to Spain, and then in Germany it's kind of in between, because the GIs came in and freed them from Nazis, so they're very thankful, but at the same time we've been there 40 years, so they're like, dude, so we're kind of getting to that point where it's like, enough is enough. But the new generation, the old generation, is still thankful for the Americans being there, so it's kind of right in between. Poland is very thankful because we helped them get rid of communism completely. Spain hates you because you backed up a fascist regime. So you got all 3 of these experiences in Europe. So I kind of identify with being the outsider as well. So this film, you know, hit me a little harder than I think it would hit me. The end is really good, and the kid buys Springsteen tickets, and the dad takes him away, and so then he's like, has this big falling out with his dad. And I had kind of a similar falling out with my mom. Like, you know, when I came back from Poland, from high school, you know, I was living with my mom briefly, and she didn't even have a home. She lost the home, and we're moving hotel to hotel to hotel, and it was like horrible. You're basically homeless, except you just have a little bit of money to go to a hotel still, so you're just almost homeless. And then she moved with a friend, and then she got kicked out, and I asked a friend, hey, can I stay? You know, I'm normal. And she said, yeah, you can stay, just like your mom has to get the hell out, you know. And then my mom was like, I'm going to freeze your bank account. So I had to break from my mom at that point. And so that was kind of an interesting point when I was 18. So yeah, I kind of went through kind of that same thing where you break from your parents. And it's very typical in the West that you break from your parents, but under a Pakistani regime, it's a very traditional family. The family roots are very deep and very tightly knit, and you're always within your community. So your uncle sees you, your aunt sees you. And so these relationships are much tighter than if you just have kind of the immediate family and that breaks apart. There's nothing to it. You know, when I grew up, my family was all over the U.S., so when I left my mom, it's like, whatever, there's this one connection, right? And then my dad, that's another connection. They weren't even living together, so it's a very disparate connection with society in a way, versus what this kid Javed is growing up with. It's a very tight-knit Pakistani family. It's not as tight-knit as they think, because obviously the father's come from Pakistan to UK, and he's kind of the only person. The only thing they have is really the Pakistani immigrant community, and so those bonds are a lot less tight than they would be in Pakistan per se. So it has a lot of depth, I think, to the film, of showing the different how the culture is connected. They do get a little bit of him dating a white girl, but they don't get into how controversial that would be within the Pakistani family. They kind of skirt that issue. That would have been an interesting angle to take on. Yeah, I mean, they just kind of skirt that. That would have been an interesting conversation, because then you would have seen kind of if the parents were racist against that, which they probably not have been a racist, but they would expect him to have gone with this arranged marriage with a Pakistani girl, so they would have been totally shocked. And they skipped that, so that would have been kind of a nice scene that they dropped from the film. I think that would have been really a nice angle, because you have the scene where you have the skinheads go against Javed, but then you could have seen the other angle with his own family being racist against him dating a white girl. That would have been really well-rounded, I think, to kind of capture the different balance. And they threw that out the window and said, oh, he's a perfect Pakistani kid, and the Pakistani family would be fine with it. And they'd probably be like, no, they wouldn't. And so they kind of missed an opportunity to have that juxtaposition, but I don't think it's much loss there. I think they kind of wanted to downplay, because the film kind of goes between two different audiences. They're appealing probably a little bit to westernized families in Pakistan, as well as the immigrant population in Pakistan, but they have to make it a little bit broader base, because people in Pakistan are probably not going to identify, for the majority part, with Bruce Springstein and be like, what the hell is this? At the same time, you have the UK population is like, oh, this is a Pakistani film. Do we really care about it? So it's a kind of a careful bridge to walk to connect the two cultures, so you get a little bit of both, and enough so it's a broad base. So that's kind of a tricky thing. I think that might have been why they didn't show the Pakistani family facing off the white girl, but I think it would have been fine if they would have added that and add a little more depth to the film. Overall, I really liked it. I think it was a fun film. There are a little bit of dead periods a little bit in the film, but not much. But yeah, it's just little tiny things in the film, which, the pacing could have been a little better. Maybe a minute chopped out here, a minute added, I'm not sure. But overall, it flows pretty well, I think. I would rate this film fun. It's going to be way better than the stupid Superbad movie with, the pimply teenagers and goofy movie they have that's coming out now at the same time. But it's kind of a good thing that they have them out at the same time, because then you'll see, really, you have this straight-laced American, like, oh, the kids that have outrageous sex or something at 12, and then you have this other one where it's like a real story with real characters, where you have this really cultural cross chasm, which is much stronger than these other kids that are just kind of growing up in generic America. So, I would recommend this film probably over that film. I don't know. I haven't seen the other film, so maybe it's funny too. I don't know. It's just they kind of showed the whole film in the marketing, so it's like, who cares now? Which I really hate when they do marketing nowadays for a lot of these films. They really give away half the plot. Some of the best jokes in this film are also a lot in the marketing, which is a shame. But they have to put enough in the marketing to kind of pull you into there. They have to have to hook you in, so they have to have like a mini story. So you have to have some elements. They drop some elements, like you don't know about the white girlfriend and stuff, so that's kind of good. Yeah, I mean, they could have showed a little bit too, maybe the little bit journey of maybe the Pakistani father. They could have had maybe 5 minutes of when he's a kid and he breaks out with his father and leaves to the UK and kind of never sees his family again, right? And that would have been a really nice add to show the background of the father and why he's so tied down to Pakistani values after leaving Pakistan. So he left Pakistan, but he's trying to say, like, no, you have to value our culture still. I screwed it up for us, but we're going to kind of hold the line here, So that's kind of an interesting concept. So I think they kind of missed a little bit there. I mean, if you've grown up as an immigrant, I know what they're talking about, and I think most people will recognize that, but they could add a little more depth to the father figure, I think. They did pretty well with the father-mother dynamic, and, the younger sisters, they're kind of more into the culture, but still rebelling a little bit. But, as girls, it's kind of, they're seen as even more, probably had to be down with. They could have had a little more drama there too between Javed and his sister when he finds out his sister's goes to this clubbing thing, and then he's just like, oh, okay, I don't know if that would be his reaction, maybe he'd be a little more controversial, like, hey, it's okay for me to be Bruce Lee, but my sister has to be pure or something, and they could have had a little controversy there, and they don't. That's fine, maybe that's Javed's natural reaction. I mean, he's kind of a mild-mannered guy, so maybe he wouldn't be so attached to the values when it came to his sister, but that would have been interesting to play around with that as well, and I think they missed out a little bit of opportunity there, but, it's kind of cool. It's more appealing to a broad audience by not showing that kind of sexism that probably would have been there, and they kind of stripped that out. So who knows? I mean, you can shoot the movie either way. I mean, you shoot it less sexist, it's more appealing to today's masses, so you kind of have to deal with today's audience where they're at versus the 1987 audience. It would have been more sexist back then, especially the immigrant family. Not totally every immigrant family is sexist, but there's more traditional values where the woman is expected to be arranged marriage, the boy's supposed to be an arranged marriage. So I think he would have been more into that kind of thing. But anyway, it's overall I think it's a really cool film, and they show kind of how music really bridges a teenager from his traditional culture to the modern day culture, and how, you know, he kind of struggles in between those both cultures. I think it's a pretty good film overall. I'd rate it good. I'd recommend it. If you want to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.